The rooftop bar sparkled with fake smiles and real ambition. I stood there in my best shirt, the one without permanent grease stains, watching my wife Vanessa work the crowd like she was running for mayor. Her laugh carried across the terrace, that practiced trill she saved for clients and bosses. "Jack!" She waved me over to a cluster of suits. "Everyone, this is my husband. He's in manual labor." The way she said it made it sound like a disease. The group turned to look at me with the kind of polite interest you'd show a zoo animal. Vanessa's boss, Nadia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, smiled without warmth. "Manual labor," she repeated, like she was tasting something sour. "How authentic." Maggie, Vanessa's best friend and fellow real estate agent, giggled. "I bet you have such rough hands, Jack. Do you actually build things?" I flexed my fingers, feeling the calluses. "Among other things." Vanessa shot me a warning look. "Jack's very good with his hands, aren't you, honey?" The arrogance seeped through every word. I'd been married to this woman for 8 years, watching her rise from a small-time agent to the company's top seller. Somewhere along the way, she'd decided I was a burden. Aidan Blackwell materialized at Vanessa's elbow, all perfect teeth and expensive cologne. He was one of those developers who talked about revitalizing communities while pricing out everyone who actually lived there. "Vanessa was just telling me about your work," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Construction, right? I have tremendous respect for the trades." "Sure you do," I thought, shaking his hand just hard enough to remind him what real work felt like. "Jack's a foreman," Vanessa said quickly. "He manages people. Even my wife couldn't just let me be a construction worker. Had to dress it up, make it sound more respectable for her crowd." Aidan nodded sagely. Leadership skills translate across industries, though I imagine the intellectual demands are quite different from what Vanessa deals with. That did it. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I felt that familiar heat behind my eyes, the same feeling I got when a contractor tried to stiff my crew on overtime. "You're absolutely right," I said, keeping my voice level. "Vanessa's job is much more complicated. She has to convince people to pay ridiculous amounts for houses that'll fall apart in 10 years. I just build things that last." The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Nadia laughed, a sharp bark that made everyone else join in nervously. "Well," she said, "I suppose we all serve our purpose." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Vanessa's face had gone pale under her makeup. "Jack's just tired. Long day at the site." "Of course," Aidan said smoothly. "Manual labor must be exhausting." There it was again. Manual labor. Like I dug ditches with my bare hands instead of coordinating million-dollar projects. I looked around the circle of faces, amused, dismissive, embarrassed. My wife's face most of all. "You know what?" I said, setting down my untouched drink. "You're right. I am tired. Tired of pretending this matters." I walked away before anyone could respond, threading through clusters of real estate professionals who parted like I might contaminate them. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's laugh, higher and more desperate now. "Don't mind him," she was saying. "He gets cranky when he's out of his element." The elevator couldn't come fast enough. Outside, the October air cut through my shirt. I sat in my truck for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, my best friend and the closest thing to a brother I had. "How's the fancy party? You wearing a tie?" I typed back, "You ever watch someone you love pretend you don't exist?" The response came immediately. "Ouch, that bad? Worse, I'll call you tomorrow." The drive home took 20 minutes through streets I'd helped repave, past buildings I'd helped wire and plumb. This town bore my fingerprints in ways Vanessa's crowd would never understand, but apparently, that didn't matter anymore. Our house sat on Maple Street, a 1960s colonial that we'd bought as a fixer-upper. I'd spent 3 years of weekends bringing it back to life, refinishing hardwood floors, rewiring the kitchen, rebuilding the front porch. Vanessa used to help, back when she thought home improvement was romantic instead of embarrassing. I was halfway through a beer when her car pulled into the driveway. She came through the front door like a storm front, heels clicking on the hardwood I'd installed. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. "What was what?" "You know exactly what. You embarrassed me in front of my boss, my colleagues." "I embarrassed you?" I stood up slowly. "Nessa, you introduced me like I was your unemployed cousin. Manual labor? Really?" She threw her purse on the couch. "That's what you do, Jack. There's nothing wrong with it, but these people what? Think they're better than me? They think differently. They move in different circles. And you want to move in those circles." She paused, and in that pause, I saw everything I needed to know. "I've worked hard to get where I am," she said finally. "I can't have what? A husband who actually works for a living? Can't have someone who doesn't understand the game. The game. Like our marriage was some kind of strategy session." "Maybe I understand more than you think," I said. She studied my face, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman I'd married. Then it was gone. "I'm going to bed," she said. "We'll talk about this tomorrow." But I was already talking to an empty room. Upstairs, I heard the shower running, then the blow-dryer, then silence. When I finally came up an hour later, she was asleep, or pretending to be. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling I'd patched and painted, listening to my wife breathe beside me. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed off the hills. I'd always loved that sound. Tonight, it sounded like a warning. The next morning, Vanessa was gone before I woke up. No note, no coffee made, just the lingering scent of her perfume and an empty space where her car should be. I stood at the kitchen window, watching Mrs. Hargrove water her flowers next door. She waved, and I waved back. At least someone in this neighborhood still acknowledged my existence. My phone rang as I was finishing breakfast. Mike's name lit up the screen. "You sound terrible," he said without preamble. "Good morning to you too. Seriously, what happened last night? Your text made it sound like World War III. I told him about the party, about Vanessa's introduction, about the looks and the comments and the way she distanced herself from me like I had some kind of social disease. Mike listened without interrupting. He'd known Vanessa almost as long as I had, back when she drove a used Honda and wore jeans to work. He'd also watched the transformation over the past few years. "So what are you going to do?" he asked when I finished. "What can I do?" She made her position pretty clear. "You could fight for her." "Fight who? Her boss? Her ambition? The entire real estate industry?" "Fight for the woman you married." I looked around the kitchen, at the custom cabinets I'd built, the tile backsplash I'd installed, the breakfast nook where we used to sit and plan our future together. "I'm not sure she exists anymore," I said. After we hung up, I wandered into the garage. This was my sanctuary, the one place in the house that was purely mine. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls. My workbench held 3 different projects in various stages of completion. Everything had its place, and everything made sense, unlike my marriage. I was organizing screws when Tommy Martinez showed up. He was my apprentice electrician, 22 years old and sharp as a tack. Kid could troubleshoot a circuit faster than most journeymen with 20 years' experience. "Hey, boss," he said, poking his head through the side door. "Thought I'd stop by, see if you needed help with that wiring project." Tommy lived 2 streets over with his grandmother. His parents had moved to Florida the year before, but he'd stayed to finish his apprenticeship. I'd become something like a big brother to him, and he'd become the son, Vanessa, and I never had. "Actually," I said, "I might need a different kind of help." I explained about the party, about Vanessa's behavior, about the growing distance between us. Tommy listened with the serious expression he wore when learning a new technique. "Sounds like she's changed," he said finally. "People change, I get that, but she's acting like she's ashamed of me. Maybe she's ashamed of herself." That stopped me short. "What do you mean?" Tommy shrugged. "My grandmother always says people put others down when they don't like what they see in the mirror." Smart kid. Smarter than his age suggested. We spent the morning rewiring the garage's overhead lights. Tommy chattered about his girlfriend, his classes, his plans for the future. Normal conversation about normal things. It was the first time I'd felt relaxed in weeks. Around noon, Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. She came into the garage wearing a designer suit I'd never seen before. "Oh," she said, seeing Tommy. "I didn't know you were here." "Just helping Jack with some electrical work," Tommy said politely. She nodded, but I could see her calculating, wondering what I'd told him, whether he'd judge her based on last night. "I need to grab some files from my office," she said to me. "We should talk later." "Sure." She disappeared into the house. Tommy watched her go, then looked at me with raised eyebrows. "That's the woman who's ashamed of you?" he asked quietly. "Apparently. Man, she's wound tight, like scary tight." From inside the house came the sound of drawers opening and closing, papers rustling. Then Vanessa's voice, muffled but clearly frustrated. "Jack, have you seen my laptop charger?" I found her in the home office we shared, surrounded by scattered files and looking frazzled. "Kitchen counter," I said, "next to the coffee maker." She brushed past me to retrieve it, and I caught another whiff of that perfume. Expensive stuff. New. "Thanks," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll be late tonight. Client dinner." "Anyone I know?" "Probably not." She was already heading for the door, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. "Of course I can meet at 7, she was saying. "The Riverside? Perfect." The Riverside was the fanciest restaurant in town, the kind of place that charged $30 for a steak I could grill better at home. After she left, I stood in the office, looking at the chaos she'd left behind. Vanessa was usually obsessively organized. This scattered, frantic energy was new. Tommy appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Define okay." He grinned. "Fair point. Hey, you know what might cheer you up? My cousin works at the Riverside, says they get all kinds of interesting customers." Something in his tone made me look up. "Interesting how?" "Well, like he sees who's eating with who. Sometimes it's not who you'd expect." The implication hung in the air between us. I thought about Vanessa's new clothes, her late nights, her sudden embarrassment about my profession. "Tommy," I said carefully, "if you heard something, anything, would you tell me?" He nodded without hesitation. "Of course, boss. We look out for each other, right?" "Right." But as we went back to work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to learn something I didn't want to know. The afternoon passed slowly. Every time a car drove by, I looked up, expecting Vanessa to return with some forgotten item. But Maple Street stayed quiet, except for the occasional dog walker and Mrs. Hargrove's ongoing battle with her garden hose. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thought you should see this." Below the message was a photo, clearly taken through a restaurant window. Vanessa sat across from Aidan Blackwell, leaning forward, laughing at something he'd said. His hand covered hers on the table. I stared at the screen until the image burned itself into my memory. Then I looked at the number and realized it wasn't unknown after all. It was Tommy's cousin, the one who worked at the Riverside. Another text arrived. "This was yesterday. Thought you should know." Yesterday. While I was at work, managing a crew of 12 guys through a complicated electrical retrofit, my wife was holding hands with Aidan Blackwell. I sat down heavily on my workbench stool. The tools around me, hammers and screwdrivers and wire strippers, suddenly looked like artifacts from a simpler time. A time when problems could be fixed with the right technique and enough elbow grease. This problem was going to require a different approach entirely. That night, I cooked dinner for one. Vanessa texted around 6 to say the client dinner was running long. Don't wait up. I ate my grilled chicken and vegetables while staring at the photo on my phone, memorizing every detail. The way she leaned toward him, the expression on her face, animated, flirtatious, alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. At least, not when she was looking at me. Mike showed up around 8 with a 6-pack of beer and the kind of intuition that comes from 20 years of friendship. "You look like someone ran over your dog," he said, settling into the chair across from me. I showed him the photo. Mike studied it for a long moment, his expression growing darker. He'd been at our wedding, had danced with Vanessa at the reception, had spent countless evenings at this same table talking about everything and nothing. "Well," he said finally, "that's not good. Understatement of the year. What are you going to do?" I'd been asking myself the same question all evening. The obvious answer was confrontation. Show her the photo, demand an explanation, force the issue into the open. But something held me back. "I want to know how deep this goes," I said. "How long it's been happening. Whether it's just emotional or if they're—" "Yeah." Mike cracked open a beer. "You want the whole picture before you make your move." "Exactly. So we do some reconnaissance." I looked at him sharply. "We? You think I'm going to let you handle this alone? Besides, I never liked that guy. Too smooth, too perfect. Guys like that always have something to hide." We spent the next hour planning. Mike worked at the supply yard that serviced most of the construction projects in town, including several of Aiden's developments. He heard all the gossip, knew which contractors were struggling, which projects were behind schedule, which developers were cutting corners. "I'll ask around," he said. "See what people are saying about Blackwell. Guys got enemies. They always do when they're that successful that fast. And I'll figure out how to get more information about Vanessa's schedule," I said. "Her laptop, her phone, her calendar. You know how to do that?" I smiled for the first time in days. I know someone who does. The next morning, I called in a favor. Tommy owed me for covering his apprentice fees when money was tight, and he was eager to help. More importantly, he was part of a generation that had grown up with technology the way I'd grown up with tools. "You want me to what?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "Just look at her browser history, her email, her calendar. I need to know what she's really doing." Tommy looked uncomfortable. "Boss, that's like invasion of privacy stuff." "Tommy, she's my wife, and I think she's cheating on me." That changed his expression. Tommy's parents had divorced when he was 15, and he still carried scars from that explosion. "Okay," he said quietly, "but we do this clean. No permanent damage, no stolen files, nothing that could get us in trouble." Agreed. That afternoon, while Vanessa was at work, we executed our plan. Tommy had brought a toolkit that would have impressed a government spy: USB drives, cables, small devices I didn't recognize. "Most people don't secure their home computers properly," he explained as he worked. "They use the same passwords for everything, they don't log out of accounts, they trust their browsers to remember everything." Vanessa's laptop was a treasure trove of information. Her email revealed a pattern of messages with Aiden going back 6 weeks. Nothing explicitly romantic, but the tone was unmistakable. Lots of "looking forward to seeing you" and "thanks for a wonderful evening" and "can't wait for our next meeting." Her calendar was even more revealing. Regular appointments labeled AB Riverside and AB Office and, most damning, AB Apartment. "She's been seeing him 3 times a week," Tommy said, scrolling through the entries. "Always during business hours, always at places where they won't run into people from your neighborhood." I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. Not anger, Not yet. Something more calculating. Can you print this? Already done. Tommy handed me a neat stack of papers. Everything's here. Emails, calendar entries, browser history. She's been looking up restaurants in the city, shopping for clothes, researching Aiden's company. I flipped through the pages, seeing my marriage dissolve in black and white. 8 years of building a life together, reduced to evidence of betrayal. There's something else, Tommy said hesitantly. Her search history shows she's been looking at apartments, expensive ones, downtown. The cold thing in my chest grew larger. She's planning to leave. Looks like it. I sat back in Vanessa's desk chair, surrounded by the home office we'd set up together, looking at proof that she'd already moved on. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd supported through real estate school, the woman I'd built this house for, she was planning her exit strategy. So what now? Tommy asked. I looked at him. This kid who'd become like family, who'd just helped me uncover the worst betrayal of my life. He was waiting for me to fall apart, to rage, to do something destructive. Instead, I smiled. Now, I said, we get creative. Tommy blinked. Creative how? Vanessa thinks I'm just some dumb construction worker who doesn't understand her sophisticated world. Aiden thinks manual labor makes me beneath his notice. They both think they're smarter than me. Aren't they worried you'll find out? That's exactly the point. They're not worried because they don't respect me enough to see me as a threat. I stood up, feeling energy flow back into my limbs. That's going to be their mistake. Boss, what are you planning? I looked out the window at Mrs. Hargrove, who was trimming her roses with surgical precision. She'd been married for 47 years to a man who died 5 years ago, but she still tended his garden like he might come home any day. I'm planning to remind them that underestimating people can be dangerous, I said, especially people who work with their hands. Tommy grinned. Need any help with that? Actually, I said, I think I might. The next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband perfectly. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched television. When Vanessa said she had to work late, I nodded sympathetically. When she mentioned another client dinner, I told her to have fun. Meanwhile, Mike was gathering intelligence on Aiden Blackwell. Guy's got 3 developments going, he reported over beers at Murphy's, the dive bar where my crew hung out after work. 2 of them are behind schedule, and word is he's having cash flow problems. What kind of problems? The kind where contractors aren't getting paid on time. My buddy Dave did the electrical on Blackwell's downtown project. Still waiting for his final payment, 3 weeks overdue. That was interesting. In construction, cash flow problems usually meant bigger problems. Projects that looked successful from the outside could be disasters underneath. Anything else? Mike grinned. Funny you should ask. Turns out our boy Aiden's got a reputation for cutting corners, using cheap materials, pushing inspectors, that kind of thing. Nothing illegal, but not exactly ethical either. And Vanessa doesn't know this? How would she? She sells houses, she doesn't build them. She probably thinks he's some kind of genius developer. I filed that information away. Vanessa prided herself on working with quality clients. If she knew Aiden was cutting corners, would she still be impressed with him? The opportunity for my first move came on Thursday. Vanessa announced she had a site visit with a client that afternoon, would be gone for several hours. I knew from her calendar that she was meeting Aiden at his apartment. Tommy, I said when she left, want to take a field trip? Aiden lived in the Riverside Towers, the most expensive building in town. All glass and steel and pretension, the kind of place that charged extra for the privilege of looking down on everyone else. We parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, Vanessa's car pulled into the visitor parking area at 2:30. She walked into the building like she owned it, confident and purposeful. There's our confirmation, I said. So what's the plan? I'd been thinking about this for days. Direct confrontation would just lead to denials, arguments, lawyers, but there were other ways to make a point. See that red BMW? I pointed to Aiden's car, parked in its designated spot. Know anything about luxury car security systems? Tommy looked nervous. Boss, we're not going to steal it, are we? Nothing like that. But those systems are pretty sensitive, right? Easy to set off accidentally? Understanding dawned on his face. Oh, yeah, very sensitive. Sometimes just bumping into one will trigger the alarm. Interesting. And once an alarm goes off, how long does it usually run? Depends on the system. Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. I smiled. Let's find out. We walked casually across the street. The parking garage was mostly empty at this time of day. Aiden's BMW sat in spot 47, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This feels wrong, Tommy muttered. Relax, we're just testing the sensitivity of his security system. I gave the car a gentle bump with my hip. Nothing happened. A slightly harder bump. Still nothing. Try the mirror, Tommy suggested. I tapped the side mirror, and suddenly the garage filled with the sound of a very expensive, very loud car alarm. Lights flashed, the horn blared, and somewhere in the building above us, Aiden Blackwell was about to have his romantic afternoon interrupted. Time to go, I said. We walked calmly back to my truck and drove away, leaving the BMW screaming behind us. I couldn't stop grinning. That's it? Tommy asked. That's your master plan? That's the beginning of my master plan. See, guys like Aiden think they're untouchable. They live in their glass towers, drive their fancy cars, take other men's wives, and never face any consequences. And now? Now he's going to start facing consequences. Small ones at first, little reminders that actions have reactions. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Client meeting running long, don't wait dinner. I texted back, no problem, hope everything's going smoothly. It wasn't, of course. At that moment, Aiden was probably explaining to my wife why his car alarm had gone off for no apparent reason, why the building security guard was knocking on his door, why their perfect afternoon had been disrupted by the harsh sound of reality intruding on their fantasy. What's next? Tommy asked. Next, we wait and watch, see how they react. See if they get paranoid or if they write it off as coincidence. And then? Then we escalate. That evening, Vanessa came home flustered and irritated. She barely spoke during dinner, just picked at her food and checked her phone constantly. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Fine, just a difficult client. Anyone I know? She looked up sharply, and for a moment I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Then the moment passed. No one you'd know, she said. Someone from out of town. I nodded and went back to my dinner, but I was thinking about that sharp look, that moment of near panic in her eyes. The car alarm had rattled them more than I'd expected. Good. Rattled people make mistakes. Later, while Vanessa was in the shower, her phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at the screen and saw Aiden's name, along with the beginning of a message. Weird day. My car alarm went off for no reason, and I can't shake the feeling that someone... The message cut off there, but I'd seen enough. They were getting paranoid, starting to look over their shoulders, starting to wonder if their secret was as safe as they'd thought. I deleted the notification and put the phone back where I'd found it. In the bathroom, the shower was still running. I could hear Vanessa singing softly, some pop song I didn't recognize. She sounded happy, relaxed, like she'd successfully compartmentalized her two lives. That was about to get much more difficult. The weekend brought the annual Riverside Fall Festival, one of those small-town events that everyone attended whether they wanted to or not. Families spread blankets on the grass, kids ran between booths selling funnel cakes and face painting, and local bands played covers of songs that were popular 20 years ago. Vanessa had begged off, claiming she needed to catch up on paperwork. I went alone, which wasn't unusual. We'd been attending fewer events together lately. What was unusual was seeing Vanessa and Aiden together at the far end of the park, near the craft beer tent. They were trying to look casual, just two professionals who'd happened to run into each other, but their body language told a different story. I bought a beer and positioned myself where I could watch them without being obvious. They were good at this, maintaining appropriate distance, not touching, keeping their voices low. But I could see the way she leaned toward him when he spoke, the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. "Jack!" Mrs. Hargrove appeared at my elbow, carrying a paper plate loaded with festival food. "I didn't expect to see you here alone. Where's Vanessa?" "Working," I said. "You know how it is with real estate. No rest for the ambitious." She followed my gaze toward the beer tent. "Oh, I see her now. Who's that handsome man she's talking to?" "Aiden Blackwell. He's a developer." "Ah." Mrs. Hargrove had lived in this town for 70 years and had seen every kind of human drama play out. "He's very attentive, isn't he?" "Very." She patted my arm with the kind of gentle sympathy that told me my situation was more obvious than I'd hoped. "Well," she said, "I suppose we all have our challenges." After she moved on, I continued watching my wife's performance. They were good at this, but they weren't perfect. When Aiden laughed at something she said, his hand briefly touched her back. When she pointed toward the bandstand, she stepped closer than necessary. Small gestures, intimate gestures. The kind that would be invisible to casual observers but screamed volumes to someone who knew what to look for. I was finishing my beer when inspiration struck. The festival's main stage sat at the center of the park, and between musical acts, local businesses and community groups made announcements. The microphone was open to anyone who wanted to promote an event or thank volunteers. I walked over to the stage coordinator, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like to make a quick announcement about workplace safety. I'm a construction foreman, and with all the development happening in town, I thought people should know about some of the risks." She looked relieved. "Oh, that's perfect. Very community-minded. You're on after the high school chorus finishes." 5 minutes later, I was standing on stage, looking out at a crowd of maybe 200 people. I could see Vanessa and Aiden near the back, both looking puzzled about why I was holding a microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began. "My name is Jack Montrose, and I've been working construction in this town for 15 years. I wanted to talk to you about something important, the difference between what looks good on the surface and what's actually built to last." A few people applauded politely. Near the beer tent, Vanessa had gone very still. "See, in my line of work, we call it lipstick on a pig. You can make something look beautiful on the outside, fresh paint, fancy fixtures, impressive marketing materials. But if the foundation is rotten, if the structure is compromised, if corners have been cut where people can't see them, well, eventually, the truth comes out." More people were paying attention now. In the crowd, I spotted several contractors who worked on Aiden's projects. They were nodding along, recognizing the truth in what I was saying. I've seen beautiful houses that were disasters underneath. Developers who promised quality but delivered cheap materials and shoddy workmanship. Projects that looked impressive until you examined them closely. Aiden had stepped forward slightly, his face dark with anger. He'd recognized this wasn't really about workplace safety. "The thing about construction," I continued, "is that eventually, everything gets inspected. The electrical, the plumbing, the foundation, all of it gets examined by people who know what to look for. And when they find problems, well, there are consequences." I paused, letting that sink in. "So my advice to everyone here is simple. Don't be fooled by a pretty facade. Ask questions, demand transparency, make sure the people you're trusting with your investments, whether that's your home, your business, or your future, are actually as solid as they appear." I handed the microphone back to the coordinator and walked off stage to scattered applause. As I moved through the crowd, several people stopped me to shake hands and thank me for the educational presentation. But I was watching Vanessa and Aiden. They were having what looked like an intense, whispered conversation. She kept glancing toward me, her face pale with anger or fear or both. Finally, they separated. Vanessa headed for the parking lot while Aiden stalked off toward the other side of the park. Neither of them looked happy. I gave them a 10-minute head start, then left the festival myself. At home, I found Vanessa pacing the living room like a caged animal. "What the hell was that?" she demanded the moment I walked in. "What was what?" "That speech, that performance. You embarrassed yourself up there, rambling about construction safety like some kind of what? Construction worker?" She stopped pacing. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" We stared at each other across the living room I'd rewired and the hardwood floors I'd refinished. 8 years of marriage hung in the air between us. "People are going to think you've lost your mind," she said finally. "Which people?" "Everyone. Your friends, your coworkers." My friends thought I made good points. Several contractors came up afterward to thank me for speaking up about quality control. "What about your reputation?" "My reputation?" I laughed, and it came out harder than I'd intended. "Vanessa, my reputation is built on actually doing good work, on delivering what I promise, on being honest with people who trust me." The implication hung in the air like smoke. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "It's 7 o'clock. I have a headache." She disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. A few minutes later, I heard her voice through the ceiling, muffled but clearly agitated. She was on the phone, probably with Aiden, probably trying to figure out how much I knew and what I was planning to do about it. Let them wonder. Uncertainty was a powerful weapon, and I was just getting started. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was at the job site, coordinating the installation of a new electrical panel, when Tommy appeared with news that changed everything. "Boss," he said quietly, "you need to see this." He showed me his phone. On the screen was a photo posted to social media by one of Vanessa's real estate colleagues, a group shot from some industry networking event. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, were Vanessa and Aiden. His arm was around her waist, her hand was on his chest, and they were looking at each other like they were alone in the room. "When was this taken?" I asked. "Last night, while you were here finishing the wiring." Last night. While I'd been working late to meet a deadline, my wife had been at a party with her lover, not even bothering to hide their relationship anymore. "There's more," Tommy said. "My cousin at the Riverside. He says they've been meeting there almost every week, always the same table, always acting like a couple. The staff thinks they're married." Something inside me finally snapped, not into rage, into clarity. Cold, perfect clarity about what needed to happen next. "Tommy," I said, "how would you like to help me with a special project?" That evening, I waited until Vanessa left for another client dinner, then put my plan into motion. It was time to stop playing games and start playing for keeps. Mike arrived first, followed by Tommy and 3 guys from my crew. I'd told them I needed help moving some equipment, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Okay," I said, once everyone was assembled in my garage. "Here's what we're going to do." I laid out the plan in detail. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its thoroughness. By the time I finished explaining, everyone was grinning. "That's cold, boss," said Danny, my lead electrician. "Remind me never to cross you." "It's not about being cold," I said. "It's about consequences. These people think they can do whatever they want, because no one will hold them accountable. Tonight, that changes." We loaded into 2 trucks and drove to the Riverside Towers. Aiden's BMW was in its usual spot, and the lights were on in his penthouse apartment. "Phase 1, I said. Tommy and Danny went to work on the building's electrical system. Nothing permanent, nothing dangerous, just a temporary rerouting that would cause a power outage in Aiden's unit. It took them 20 minutes to locate the right junction box and make the necessary adjustments. Phase 2, I said when they returned. Mike and I took the service elevator to Aiden's floor. The hallway was empty, just like we'd expected. Rich people didn't socialize with their neighbors. Aiden's door was solid wood with an expensive lock, but I wasn't planning to break in. Instead, I taped a manila envelope to the door at eye level. Inside was a copy of every piece of evidence Tommy had gathered: emails, calendar entries, photos, browser history. Everything that proved the affair had been going on for months, but that wasn't the real message. The real message was that I knew, that I'd been watching, that their secret wasn't secret anymore. Phase 3, I said when we returned to the trucks. This was the part I'd been looking forward to most. We drove to Vanessa's real estate office, a sleek building in the business district. Her car was gone, but several others remained, her colleagues working late or attending evening events. I had a key to the building. Vanessa had given it to me months ago when she needed help moving some furniture. She'd probably forgotten about it. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Vanessa's company occupied half the building. The office was dark except for emergency lighting, but that was enough for what we needed to do. I led the group to Vanessa's desk, a glass and chrome monument to professional ambition. On it sat framed photos of us from happier times, business cards in a crystal holder, and a small plant I'd given her for her birthday. "This feels wrong," Tommy said quietly. "What feels wrong," I replied, "is what she's been doing to our marriage." I opened the manila folder I'd brought and began arranging its contents on her desk. More copies of the evidence, photos of her and Aiden together, printouts of their email exchanges, a timeline showing how long the affair had been going on. But the centerpiece was a single sheet of paper with a message I'd typed that afternoon. "Vanessa, I know everything. We need to talk. Tonight. Jack." I placed it directly in the center of her desk, weighted down with her crystal paperweight. "Phase 4, I said. We returned to the parking garage, where Mike produced a can of washable paint and a brush. Working quickly, he painted a message on the concrete wall next to Aiden's parking space. "Some foundations can't be repaired." It would wash off eventually, but not before Aiden saw it. Not before he understood that his secret was out, and his comfortable life was about to become very complicated. "That's it," I said as we packed up our supplies. "Now we wait." We didn't have to wait long. My phone started ringing at 9:30. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately, then again. Finally, I answered. "Jack." Her voice was tight with panic. "We need to talk." "Yes," I said calmly. "We do. I'm coming home. I'll be here." I sent the guys home and sat in my living room, surrounded by the life I'd built with a woman who'd decided I wasn't good enough for her anymore. The house was quiet except for the tick of the grandfather clock I'd restored and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. When Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway, I was ready. She came through the front door like a hurricane, her face flushed with anger and fear. "How dare you?" she said before the door was even closed. "How dare you invade my privacy, stalk me, harass my colleagues?" "Colleagues?" I interrupted. "Is that what we're calling Aiden now?" She stopped mid-sentence, realizing her mistake. "I know everything, Vanessa. The affair, the planning, the apartment hunting. I know you've been living a double life for months." She sank into the chair across from me, all the fight going out of her at once. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." "What do you want?" I looked at this woman I'd loved for 8 years, this stranger who'd been sharing my bed while planning her escape. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tonight. Pack whatever you need and go to Aiden's place, or go to a hotel, or go wherever you've been planning to go. But don't sleep in this house anymore." "Jack, I'm not finished." My voice was steady, controlled. "Tomorrow, You can come back for the rest of your things. We'll figure out the divorce details later. But tonight, I want you gone." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her calculating, wondering if she could deny everything, if she could somehow talk her way out of this. "The evidence is pretty comprehensive," I said. "Photos, emails, witnesses. Your boss is going to have some interesting questions about your client relationships." That broke her. She put her face in her hands and started to cry, not the gentle tears of remorse, but the harsh sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "I never meant for this to happen," she said through her tears. "Yes, you did. You planned it. You executed it, and you enjoyed it. The only thing you didn't plan on was getting caught." She looked up at me with mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I loved you, Jack. I still do." "No," I said quietly. "You loved the idea of me, the reliable husband, the steady provider, the man who would always be there while you figured out what you really wanted, but you never loved me enough to be honest with me." I stood up and walked to the front door, holding it open. "Goodbye, Vanessa." She gathered her purse and her dignity and walked past me into the night. At her car, she turned back one last time. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I replied, "but sorry doesn't rebuild a foundation this rotten." I watched her drive away, then closed the door and locked it. The house felt different already, emptier but somehow cleaner, like a weight had been lifted from its walls. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "How did it go?" I typed back. "It's over." "Need company?" I looked around the living room, at the photos I'd need to put away and the memories I'd need to sort through. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the practical details of dismantling a marriage. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. "No," I texted back. "I'm good." And for the first time in a long time, I actually was. Outside, Mrs. Hargrove's porch light came on. She appeared in her doorway, probably drawn by the sound of raised voices. When she saw me standing at my window, she waved. I waved back, and she nodded once, a gesture of understanding that passed between neighbors who'd both learned that sometimes the only way to fix something is to tear it down and start over. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I had work to do tomorrow, a crew to manage, a life to rebuild. But I had something else too, the satisfaction of knowing that when people tried to take advantage of me, when they mistook kindness for weakness and manual labor for stupidity, I could remind them that underestimating someone is a dangerous game. After all, we construction workers know how to build things. We also know how to tear them down.